Here is an example problem for 8.2 confidence intervals for sample proportions. So keep in mind our confidence interval is a range of values, an interval of values that we think the true value or the parameter is in between. So here we have a random sample of 7,833 high school students. In 2011, approximately 43% reported that they had texted while driving at least once in the last 30 days. What's the 95% confidence interval for the true proportion of teens who had texted while driving in the previous 30 days? Okay, so first we want to plug in our formula when we do this. But before we do that, we have to state what our problem is. So we want to say what we want to estimate, P, we know it's a proportion, equals the true proportion or actual proportion of teens who had texted while driving in the previous 30 days with 95% confidence. So we're saying whether it's a proportion or whether it's a mean we're looking for, what the variable is, and the percent confidence. We're for one sample interval for P if the following conditions are satisfied. That means we only have one sample. This one, we're doing a z-interval based on a z-score for our parameter. So let's check conditions. Random, yes, we have a random sample. So we know the mean of the sampling distribution of p hat will equal the true mean. Normal. Well, remember that trick we looked at. 43% of 7,833. That means that 3,368 were drivers that were texting. So our sample size times the proportion, those two numbers cancel, right? Because our sample size is also in the denominator. So here's that little trick. We can just look at the numerator now that we're using p hat to check this condition, since we don't know what the true parameter p is. So we can just look at the numerator and use this value. 3,368 is greater than or equal to 10, and 4,465 is greater than or equal to 10. So the shape of our sampling distribution is approximately normal. We can just look at the percent that are satisfying whatever proportion we're interested in, the proportion that aren't. And if both of those two numbers are bigger than 10, then we're good to go. Independent, well, let's see. The independent condition is the 10% condition, meaning we can't sample more than 10% of the population. So that would be 10 times 7,833, or 78,330 teenagers are driving. So that we can use the formula for standard deviation. So our conditions are satisfied. Let's take a look at what our general formula looks like for a confidence interval. That's going to be our sample proportion. We're down in the do section now that our conditions are satisfied. Sample proportion plus or minus the critical value for the confidence level we're talking about times the standard deviation of the statistic. Now here's the general formula that you're given, more or less. It'll say critical value here and standard error here on your formula sheet. So let's plug in our numbers. Try pausing and doing the rest of this problem yourself. So 43% or 0.43 is our point estimate. 1.96 is for 95% confidence. And then here's our standard deviation, p hat times 1 minus p hat over the sample size, all square rooted. Now, this portion is called our standard error. This is our critical value. This is our point estimate. Together, this whole portion is the margin of error. The margin of error changes with our confidence level. However, the standard error will be the same since it's based on the sample size and p hat. So go ahead and solve for the margin of error now. Pause and solve. So this comes down to about, I rounded off here, 0.0056. That together, when we multiply it, will be our margin of error. Let's see what that looks like. So then we take the point estimate, we add the margin of error for the upper bound, which is here. We subtract it for the lower bound. So we get 41.9% to 44.1% is our confidence interval. So let's, one quick step that I wanted to show you here that we didn't get to in class is you can also do this on your calculator. Now on your calculator, this is number 9 in the 8.2 part of the packet. On the calculator, you're going to want to go to Stat, Tests, and then you're going to go to one proportion, Z int. It's going to ask you for X and for N. X is the number in your numerator, or in this case, if we go back up, X would be 3,368 and n is our sample size, which would be 7,833. Then it's going to ask you for the level of confidence, and you choose that. You get a slightly more exact answer on the calculator. One reason we really have to do it by hand, though, is because we're going to have a lot of questions about how to make the margin of error smaller, the standard error smaller. So you really need to know how to do this by hand and on the calculator once you get the hang of it. So let's conclude. So we conclude by saying we are, insert your confidence level here, 95% confident that the interval from 41.9% to 44.1% captures the true, and here's where we insert what we're describing, the variable, true proportion of teenage drivers who have texted while driving at least once in the past month. And that's how we'd wrap up one of these confidence interval questions.